Good evening, everybody. My name is Scott Warner. I'm president of the Culinary Historians of Chicago, and right now we're in our 32nd year. So we appreciate you being here to keep us going. And we have a wonderful speaker tonight who's talked to our group several times in the past when we used to be live at the Chicago History Museum. And our guest tonight is Maureen Abood, and I've known Maureen for years before when she wasn't even in food writing. I met her. Well, she's been in food writing, but she's another kind of writer too, a wonderful writer. But Maureen Abood is the author of Rosewater and Orange Blossoms, which won an International Association of Culinary Professionals. She was an award finalist for that book, and she received the Savour Best Food Blog Award, Savour Reader's Choice Award for Best Regional Cuisine Blog, and an IACP award for other things. I'm not going to read. She has an illustrious background. I'm just giving you the frosting on the cake for some of her background. And Maureen is a food educator, a recipe developer, and entrepreneur. She has appeared as an expert on Lebanese cuisine and culture on Today, Chicago and Michigan Television, and National Public Radio's A Splendid Table, and has been featured in, I'm not going to read all this stuff. She's done so much, but she's been featured in New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune, and Carol Haddix, the editor of the retired food editor of the Tribune. I just saw her face. She's watching you tonight, Maureen.
Yes, hi, Carol.
And yeah, welcome, Carol. And she's been featured in the Wall Street Journal. Maureen is a second generation Lebanese American. She lives in Harbor Springs in East Lansing, Michigan, and I know her from her days when she lived in Chicago. And she lives with her husband, Dan Shaheen. And we're going to get started now. Well, Maureen's here tonight to give us some cultural food history. And she's here tonight to talk about what's in her book, Lebanese Baking, which is a groundbreaking book. And them so that at least two copies out on the market.
There we go. Two of us bought a copy.
Yes, and the book is groundbreaking. I don't think anything like it has ever been done before. And in my looking through it, I've seen tons and tons of cookbooks over the years. I think this is just outstanding. She captures the culture of the people. She captures her own voice. Her own voice is in there, and the recipes look wonderful, doable, and delicious. They're familiar. She uses familiar ingredients and with the exotic Middle Eastern ingredients, and it all looks so eater friendly. So I'm drooling as I talk about this, but I'm older too, and I drool anyway. So anyway, on that note, Maureen, would you take us on a magic carpet to the wonderful world of Lebanese baking and your food history of your people? Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Scott. That was a nice introduction, and thank you for having me. It's so nice to be back in Chicago. I was in Chicago last week, actually, doing some book tourish types of things and teaching a class at the chopping block. And we had an event with Les Dames Escoffier at Cafe Yaya, and it was all just a lot of fun and brought back some great memories from 10 years ago when my first book came out. So I love Chicago and I'm happy to be with all of you. And I love what the culinary historians do, tapping in so well to food, culture, and history. Well, my book, Lebanese Baking, launched about a month ago, but it launched in my heart a long time ago. The book was something that I knew when my first book, when I was writing my first book, Rosewater and Orange Blossoms, that chapter on desserts and breads just kept getting longer and longer. And I think it's the longest chapter in the book. And not because there's so much more to say about that than all of the rest of Lebanese cuisine, but really because of my own interest in the baking traditions. And I knew then that something would be done and that I needed to do it. And then time passed, a bunch of time passed, and during that time, I didn't stop thinking about the book. I just started thinking about it in new ways. I lost my mother during that time. She had had dementia, and we went through that thing that so many families go through. And for whatever reason, even though I've had other very substantial losses in my life, that one got me really, well, not only was and is it awful not to have mom around, but it got me thinking about generational loss and preservation of our recipes, and through that preservation of our culture. And I realized that if you know that if kind of simply if we aren't capturing this in a meaningful way, people aren't going to be able to make the dishes. you know it's I have a huge library of every book that touches on Middle Eastern cuisine, and specifically very deeply on Lebanese cuisine. And these are a lot of church books and old recipe cards that I love. But when I went to bake and find out more, I was really hard pressed to find what I was looking for. The recipes just didn't give me what I needed. And there are all kinds of Lebanese baking recipes, from the more simplified recipes to very complex recipes. And without the the deeper instruction on how to make some of these, a lot of shaping that goes on, and using different types of doughs for them, I just couldn't see our baking culture surviving too well. Because when I look at the next generations, my nieces and nephews, and all the younger guys and gals, they're interested, but they need to learn, and they're not necessarily around it the way I was. I wasn't even, as a Lebanese American, we were very much American. And so I had my grandmother, I had my mother in our wider family, but I just think, wow, if I hadn't had Sitto, my grandmother, if I couldn't have been at her apron strings and my mother's apron strings, who would I be? And I think about that for the next generations. Who will they be if they don't carry this thread? And who will we as a people, as Lebanese Americans, be if they aren't able to carry the thread forward? So the book is really meant to inspire not just Lebanese Americans and Lebanese around the world and the diaspora, but all people who have a curiosity about world cuisines, and then the bakers who just love to make different cultures baking. I really do. And so I have my Italian baking cookbooks and my German baking, Scandinavian baking. That one came out, I think, a year or two ago, that beautiful Scandinavian book with um, the freeze-dried berries crushed on a white frosting on top. So these books draw us in, the photography and the sort of magical feeling that we have about entering into the sights and the sense of another cuisine's baking. And I wanted that for Lebanese baking because I knew it holds all of that for home bakers, and that it can.
Okay, well, I will be the Grand Inquisitor here and start asking you. I think you've answered one major question that we had, which is why this book and who inspired it. Well, you've already answered that one. Um, how does Lebanese American culinary history differ and reflect that of Lebanon's in country?
Yeah, and I do like this question because our family and many Lebanese in the US, they came in stages and waves, and we probably have some Lebanese Americans who are here with us tonight. My my grandparents came on one side. My grandfather came as a young boy at the in the late 1800s, and um, the rest of them came in the early 1900s. They came to Michigan, and they came here for jobs in the auto industry, certainly. And my maternal grandparents had a parcel of land in the Upper Peninsula that they were given through the Land Grant Act. So they came to the UP. It probably was summer because they didn't go running. If I suppose it reminded them of Lebanon in some ways, because of the bounty of Michigan, in those softer seasons. But they they established, they were in, and then many Lebanese Americans came, of course, in the 70s, during the strife, 70s and 80s of what was going on in Lebanon. But it was for them to assimilate and fit in and straddle really that difference between wanting to be American, speak English, eat American foods to the degree that it helped them feel like a part of it, and preserve who they are and who they were. And I think that they did a very good job with that, because my parents and then my many cousins all feel very tied to being Lebanese. And I think a big part of that is the food that is a connector, both in bringing the community together to cook and bake together, to eat. It's just a central part of how we communicate and how we gather. Don't really gather without something that is shared, Lebanese food and food in general. I think that one of the differences between Lebanese Americans and I have a lot of family that is still in Lebanon or is still very connected to their time in Lebanon. Um, they know a slightly different cuisine than what I know and what I grew up with. And that I don't know if it's Americanization of the food so much as maybe a dwindling, or it takes on a different, a life of its own. I think that the repertoire was probably narrower as it got down to my generation, and even for my parents, when they were striking out on their own, and they were doing a lot of the cooking, but we were still having fried chicken and and kibbe, but all of that together. And um and and it's always interesting for me to connect with Lebanese, and to have been to Lebanon and to get that deeper exposure to the food and culture that is a little bit different. It's so broad, and that was one of the things that I wanted to spend some time on for my book. The book is rooted in my family, my experiences, my memories and nostalgia and all of that. But I knew it was very important that the book go beyond that. That's an inspiration point, but it's not the book. The book seeks to really cover as much ground as possible, with Lebanese baking. And so that involved a lot of research and a lot of realizing how much has not been written about many aspects of the baking, like the kanafi, for example. There's a whole chapter on kanafi, and kanafi is a pastry made with kataifi dough, which it became popular-ish, if people really knew what they were eating, in the viral Dubai chocolate bar. and that has kataifi, toasted kataifi chopped up in the pistachio cream in the bar. And so that was an interesting phenomenon, and people started, I think, to wonder what that was. And when I was researching that chapter, for example, I discovered just that there really was nowhere that you could find everything there is to know about kanafi, the pastry. And I realized there are all these different types of crusts and the way that they're made. One of them doesn't even have the kataifi dough in it. It's like a cheater crust.
Excuse me,
Probably,
Maureen, katafi, is that kind of like a phyllo dough?
it's sometimes referred to as shredded phyllo,
Hmm.
but it isn't actually that. It's actually its own pastry that it looks like Rapunzel's hair. It's many, many strands of this thin. It's like a batter that gets poured down onto a hot griddle, spinning griddle, and it creates these thin strands that are then gathered up, and you purchase them kind of like a main that's been wrapped up and frozen. And that's the kataifi dough, but it's always chopped up in some way and coated with butter usually, and made into a crust or a topping or some other wonderful pastry. But there's a lot to do with it. And I think, I just was excited to be able to pull together uh more about Kanafi. So that's just one example of where, even here in Michigan, where we have more Arab Americans than anywhere, um, in the United States at least, even here, there just was not a super clear understanding of the kanafi. Though you can go to Dearborn and have this amazing, amazing pastry, which would be like this layer of chopped kataifi dough mixed with butter, and then it's baked to a really toasty crust. And the classic has cheese on it, and that's just super melty, like cheese pull extraordinaire. And it has syrup, flour water syrup over the top. And this is sometimes it's tucked into a sesame seeded bread, almost like a pita called kak. And that is like a breakfast. It's a breakfast food. Very delicious.
And maybe I'm jumping the gun here, but could you talk about a few other um, dishes, a few of the pastries that you feature in your book, just so because we're not live and we don't have a buffet in front of us, could you give us a little bit of a verbal buffet to make us our mouths water as we before we listen to the rest of your wonderful talk?
I'd love to. And I was just thinking that too, Scott, I should be showing some pictures, a
Yes.
little show and tell. So this right here is the Kataifi dough. This is one of my favorite photos in the book. It just says so much to me. Like the Lebanese women often wear these gold bangles, and to be handling the dough like that, just a fun one. And we had that photo shoot in my house, so up north in Michigan. But this is just an example of how we handled the kataifi, the kanafi. These are the four crusts. So the chapter's like a choose your own adventure. You can pick a crust and then pick a topping, and it's really a lot of fun. The book, the recipes, it contains both sweet and savory Lebanese baking. So you have a lot of the yeasted breads that are traditional Lebanese breads, and that includes, of course, the pita. And you can make a very absolutely delicious bite with the pita, making an arias, and that's in here too, where the pita is cut and filled with a ground minced lamb that's heavily seasoned and then pan seared, and the juices get just into the bread, and that gets dipped into a yogurt sauce. Very delicious and simple too. But another of the breads that is really, that are so important is this manaish, the flatbreads, the manushi. So these have different toppings, and they're a soft bread that folds, and you can put in it, typically you'd put in cucumbers and fresh mint and the labneh, which is the strained yogurt, and some turnip pickles, and roll it up. And that's also a breakfast. It's often topped with za'atar spice, the very traditional Lebanese spice of dried wild thyme and sumac and sesame seeds mixed with a little olive oil. This bread is so iconic that it's often just referred to as za'atar, but za'atar is actually the spice and manushi is the bread. But the za'atar bread is a traditional Lebanese breakfast bread. So that recipe I love too because it 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 simplifies the making of this dough, and it just makes four simple, smallish breads that you could pull off pretty easily in the morning. So that's a fun approach. And I also include there's a whole chapter on the bitlewa, and this is the Lebanese version of baklava. What makes it Lebanese and not Greek is mostly to do with the flavor. Greek baklava has a honey syrup and often will have spices like cinnamon in the nuts, in the nut fillings. And Lebanese uses a flower water syrup using orange blossom water and rose water, and then any variety of fillings. And certainly, the Turkish baklava is extensive as well. But the Lebanese, we have, it was very easy to dedicate a whole chapter to the bitlewa. And don't be deterred by the opening recipes, which are for homemade phyllo dough. We don't typically do that, but I really wanted to include those recipes in the book. I thought that they were just so important to my process and really to all of us as a form of understanding and appreciation for our elders who had to make their own phyllo in order to have the pastry. And I always thought, what a burden. What they had to go through for their family to have a bite of bitlewa. But I came to really I fell in love with making phyllo. It's so much fun. Again, not a lot out there, not a ton of instruction is out there, at least written. Certainly there are some videos, but I wanted to break it down and make it doable. And I think that it is. There are two different methods here, the wet and the dry method. And throughout the book, you'll find these instructional grids showing how to. And that was very important to me that we would have that going on so that you can not only read how to, but you can see step by step. Every recipe has a photo, a beautiful photo, along with instructions, instructional photos. But the one thing to keep in mind about the bitlewa, there are all these different shapes, and you can make nests out of using a dowel and shaping the phyllo on a dowel. Um, but you can make a pan of bitlewa in a 13 by 9 by 2 pan with the wonderful phyllo frozen that you can buy in the grocery store. And when you make your component parts in advance, it becomes an assembly project, and it's really not difficult. And, my Aunt Rita made so much of this at the holidays that she came up with this way of she didn't butter every layer. She put stacks in of the phyllo, put the nuts in another stack, cut it in diamonds, and poured the butter over the whole thing, and that seeps in. You can bake it. So this takes a lot of the time out of making it, though time spent baking, of course, is delightful. But it's something that you can do, and it's a wonderful thing to do over the holidays and have that. have that pan around it, be cutting off diamonds and sharing them. And so those are some of my favorites in the book.
Um, the there's a huge French influence in Lebanese cuisine. What's the background on the French influence in Lebanese cuisine?
The Lebanon was a protectorate of France over a 20 plus year period. Um, in the last century, and that had a tremendous influence in Lebanon and in France. Really, the Lebanese, many Lebanese will speak English, Arabic, and French. It's ingrained. It's a part of the culture, and with that, you also have really wonderful French. Um, flair in Lebanese cuisine. And it's a special thing. And of course, you then also will see some of the Middle Eastern effect in French food. But we have, when I went there, I was just like blown away to see. It hadn't occurred to me. I knew that everyone was speaking French. I knew my family members spoke French. I just didn't realize the real fabric of all of this till I was there, and we were having these wonderful um, croissant with za'atar spice rolled up in the croissant. And to me, that just seemed like such a neat expression of the two cultures coming together. And I include that recipe in the book too, and sort of simplified the making of that croissant so that we can actually do it and not be, put off by making a batch of croissants. But also we have our Lebanese macaroon cookies, and there are several versions of this cookie. Oh, here's the croissant just to show you with the za'atar. The macaroon cookie, uh, I thought it would be neat, and I did include a couple of different versions of it was always called macaroon in our family, the macaroon. There's like a pastry finger with walnuts inside, and I think that those are very distinctively from the south of Lebanon, where my father's family is from. And other styles, a coconut macaron that is a toasted coconut with a cherry in the middle. And those are really common to see wrapped in grocery stores, even here in Dearborn and whatnot. And then I included the French macaron as well, that I always loved seeing at French pastry shops, especially there in Chicago, with raspberries and a rose water involved there too, and just like a really special thing. So it's a nice and a very neat history.
Um, you talk about Sage bread baking, SAG bread baking in your book, and it seems emblematic of so much about Lebanese cuisine in this book. What is Sage bread baking, and what does it mean to the cuisine and to you personally?
Sage bread, we grew up calling it Syrian bread, and I have a grandfather that didn't like that, so he would always encourage us to call it Lebanese bread. But the the sage bread is this very thin bread. You can see it here as part of the feast in the book. It's also called markook, a very thin, round dough, so thin that you really can't transfer it to the sage, which is a dome oven that has a gas coil underneath it, without a tool, which is a pillow. It's called a cotta. Lay this thin dough over the cotta, and you can flip it onto the dome oven, which is open air. My own sitto made this bread when we were young, and um, it's it's absolutely divine. It's a very chewy, soft bread that's foldable, And you'll see, I mean, it can be as big as the baker can make the bread. It's made a little bit like a pizza, in the sense that that dough for the skilled baker, that dough is tossed between your hands to get it into a larger and larger round. This was so important to me, this bread, that recognizing that this is a dying art, and that, the only people I know who still make it are quite elderly. And I thought, years ago, before I even wrote my first book, I was trying to learn this bread from my grandmother and then trying to make it on my own. And it took years for me to really figure out a way to make this bread that would taste the way it did when my grandmother made it. The bread is super important to the way we eat. It's always on the table. It, if you're lucky enough to have it, it's always on the table. It's like a utensil. You tear off a piece, take something off your plate, whatever it is, and you eat it with this bread. And sometimes pita can be that thin that you can eat bread with pita, eat your food with pita as well in that same manner. But this is its own thing and its own flavor. And I have a grid here that shows the process of making this bread. Here we're making it on a sage. I have several Sage ovens, that I've become like a collector of these things. But you don't have to have that, and that was really important to me as well. Is that how can we make the Sage bread in the oven? My grandmother made it in the oven. She had a big steel, in the base of the oven that she would that and steel really holds the heat so well, um, better than a stone. And so I use a baking steel as well. And I loved connecting with the guy that has this baking steel company now that makes the steels for the oven for pizza and whatnot. And um, happens to live here in Michigan. I went and met him, and we got together to be able to give people the baking steel for making sage bread. But sage bread is it's a cornerstone of the book because it's key. It's emblematic of what we're trying to do here, which is enabling and inspiring all of us to be able to make these specialty items that are, we don't want them to become extinct.
You- Excuse me for a moment. I believe we can buy that bread here in Chicago.
You probably can, in
Yeah,
the Middle Eastern, yeah, really.
because
That
to me it looks like you're buying bed sheets. It's so thin, you know, but
it's
but
so
you're,
thin.
yeah,
Now there's the paper thin version that's not quite, it's a little different than this bread. That's really more the marcouk, and it's the sage bread in that form. It has some semolina on it. It has a slightly different texture than my bread here does. This one's a little bit softer and just ever so slightly thicker than that super super thin, or it has some areas that might be that thin but then not the whole thing.
the next time I'm in one of those bakeries, I'll take pictures of the labels and send them to you
Oh,
just to
that's
get an idea.
wonderful.
Yeah,
Yes, and we have those breads, of course, quite a bit here in Michigan, and they're folded and bagged, and we can buy them at
yep,
our Lebanese restaurant here. Very good, not as good as homemade.
of course, of course. Scott, I turn it back to you.
Okay. Um, now, you you grew up in Michigan, Maureen, and I have a full disclosure here. I spent some of the happiest growing up years of my life at my grandparents' cottage in Michigan.
Oh,
Yeah, and I remember I just took it for granted, but I remember the peach pie my grandmother would make and the blueberry
Oh,
pie, with the world-renowned blueberries from South Haven, Michigan. Uh, and
the
we had
fruit.
our cottage in South Haven. And I just remember the wonderful fruit that I thought was normal for growing up, but it wasn't. It was Michigan stuff. But what role did growing up in Michigan and living there? There was we had a speaker for the culinary historians. I forgot his name, Jason or somebody, but he owns American Spoon.
Oh, Justin Rashid.
Justin, is he Lebanese too?
Yes, he is.
Oh my
I
God.
know him well. Yes.
I bet. And he gave a wonderful talk with his family about their
Oh,
incredibly wonderful preserves and fruits, jellies and jams. I mean, incredible, incredibly delicious. So,
they are special. They are really special.
really world class. I mean, and
Hmm.
to capture the Michigan part of the flavor is Michigan in that, I can tell you. But what role did growing up in Michigan and living there now play in your book? Because you have many references to Michigan in a variety of ways in the book.
Yeah, and Michigan, it's always been special to me. I did grow up here, and of course it took me going away from Michigan to really know what it is that I have in this place, that's this sense of place that's very much a part of me. It's a very much a part of my family. And so after I had lived in Chicago for a really long time, and then I moved to California to go to culinary school. And then I moved back to northern Michigan, up to Harbor Springs. Very quiet place, much quieter at that time than it is now, even. And settled in to write my blog and start to write my first book. And I was just I fell head over heels in love with Michigan, in a way that I realized I had always loved Michigan, but I was going around taking photos and just by myself experiencing this beauty and abundance. And it was important to me. I don't even know that I was trying so hard but to include it, but Michigan just popped up very naturally in both of my books. And especially with the baking, there are some cherry recipes here and apricot and just the abundance of fruit. And it is so connected to Lebanese cuisine and culture, because the Lebanese love fruit so much. And what I had always heard growing up was just how incredible the fruit was in Lebanon, how giant the peaches, how incredible the melons, and all the things that, and I always thought, that everyone was nostalgically exaggerating. But when I was there, I saw how true it was and how abundant the fruit was, and the fruit platters at the end of a meal. This is this is how the Lebanese really eat sweets, is with fruit on a daily basis after a meal, and not with bitlewa after every evening meal, but that's more for a feasting. Although if it was left up to me, I would certainly have a sweet every single day. But that fruit forward, produce forward aspect of Michigan um, is interwoven into the book. And Michigan is like, its influences on me are profound, just the same way the family influences are.
I have another question here for you. What role does social media play in helping people become better or less so bakers and cooks?
We have such a love-hate relationship with our social media, or at least I do, because there's so much there that is so engaging and so inspiring and exciting. especially when it comes, I mean, you start learning how to make phyllo dough, and you're going to see in your feed like a lot of incredible dough shaping. And I love to see all of that. And I have learned from that. Um, However, it's almost like these recipe cards that are so special and important to our history, but it's like they're so truncated. Everything that goes on feels surface. And so while we love it, I love it for the ability to connect and the ability to share, you know, Lebanese baking and recipes and pieces of myself with a wide swath of people that I would never reach otherwise. Um, at the same time, we don't want it to replace the deeper experience of recipe development and recipe reading and baking itself. I mean, I think that sometimes our sort of watching forever and ever and ever can take over, and we're not actually doing. So we want to make sure that we're also doing and making and trying, and that even though what we always see is, for the most part, the beautiful things that come out so well, both literally and metaphorically on social media, um, we want to be able to go into the kitchen and make our mistakes and learn and grow.
Speaking of doing, years ago, I had, well, this relates to what you were just saying. Um, I had the honor of interviewing Judith Jones, who was the
Oh,
child. Yes, Julia, you must have met her over the years at the conference.
yes. Oh, I sure did. She was special.
Yes, she really was. And when I interviewed her about how tips on how to write a cookbook, she said something like, take them by the hand and guide them and show them how to make it. And that's what your book does. I mean,
Mm.
it it this is complicated, intense stuff. It looks like everything is so simplified, and you take somebody by the hand with that incredible photography. You show them the steps. Anyway, I don't want to. It's one of the best cookbooks I've ever seen, honestly.
Oh
I
gosh,
don't, I
Scott,
don't, I just rarely say that, but, and especially it's
thank you.
groundbreaking. And who knows about Lebanese cuisine, but it all looks familiar again because if it's a cake recipe with buttercream frosting, you've got the Lebanese influence in there. So it's something we're familiar with, and it takes us to a new level. But I'm going to stop anyway.
Oh,
I
thank you. That means a lot. That means a lot. And I am glad you mentioned the cake because there are some really simple, beautiful recipes here. There's a mocha cardamom cake that's so good, and it has a mocha buttercream frosting on it. Super simple snack cake that you can make in a bowl with a spoon, and it's tremendous, and it's become a real favorite of ours. And that's one that came out of my own inspired ideas, that's got like the Arabic coffee flavor going on and the cardamom, but it's not a traditional Lebanese recipe. So there is a lot of that in the book too.
Yeah, your book is painful to look at because it makes one so hungry, and you want to go in and make all this stuff. And it is not intimidating, to say the least. It's begging you to go ahead and do it. Now, what recipes should we start with on first approaching Lebanese baking? Any tips on what to dive into?
Well, I do think that if you're a novice baker or a nervous baker or someone who's not done a ton of baking, that you can still try some of the recipes that might seem for the more experienced, like the fataya. There's a whole chapter on this beautiful these savory yeasted dough pies, hand pies, little hand pies, and they're filled. with different fillings. I'm going to show you the fataya here. Now, this recipe I've had, in my first book, and I've had it on my website for a long time, and I redeveloped it for the book just so we could make absolutely sure that it's just this perfect recipe that I went to Dearborn to one of my favorite bakeries there to learn from them. But I came up too with this recipe here, which is cheese fataya XL. And it gives you a chance. Not only is it absolutely delicious, it's got a garlicky, cheesy topping on it, but it gives you a chance to work with this dough where you're not making many small pies. You're making two large pies, but you're still experiencing some of the seams that you make, a little bit of that, and placing a dry filling on the top, and it gets you right in there, but it's not quite as complicated. So that's one that I would suggest trying. And certainly there are many cookies that are super doable. And I mean, the cover girl is this matmoul cookie. Um, I posted about the matmoul molds that I had made. I have an online shop, and I developed lots of tools to accompany the book because I wanted to make sure, again, that everyone had what they need to make these recipes. And the molds are not always easy to find really good ones. The vintage ones are the best. They're just like many vintage things, they have uh, higher quality to them. So I wasn't able to get them made out of wood, which is how they're classically done. So I had them cast in resin by a Chicago artisan. And these cookies are doable. They're quite doable, even though you see this very special molded look. If you get the mold, you can make them in the molds and they're really fun, but you can also just use your fingers to create a pretty design on the exterior. And there are ways to do things with or without the mold. And there are some other cookies that are just, simple and wonderful. The thumbprint cookies. I love those. They're kind of a basic cream cheese shortbread cookie, and they have a gem of jam in the center. And of course, I had to mention American a Spoon in the book because was using their jams in my photo shoot and that kind of thing too. But those are some nice ways in.
I am so hungry right now. So my sweet tooth is flaring up here.
I would love to be able to share a treat with everyone. And if we were in person, I would bring a treat for all of you.
Well, for the good old days there. But um, anyway, we're going to turn this over to the chat questions. Kathy will pick out the questions and read them to you. And Kathy, take it away.
Oh, the part you guys were talking about social media. I really like what I can find and learn on YouTube. Just all those little subtle hand tricks. It was even more interesting, I thought, 10, 15 years ago, because I remember I knew somebody who grew up in Hong Kong, and he was served several times a week a steamed custard. I found a woman in her kitchen showing you how to do it. It was very interesting. But it's the same thing with Lebanese or any other, where there's subtle tricks. That's almost as good as having grandma when you don't have a grandma.
So
That's
true.
Lebanese.
It's so true. It is a special thing, and we're lucky to have it. It is great to be able to see all of that and learn from it.
Here's a question that, well, we can answer to her, and in fact, I know her. Is there any Lebanese grocery stores, restaurants, and bakeries in Chicago area you would recommend? But maybe you have some sense of what's here, or maybe not. If that's the case, we'll move on.
Um,
I know
you
you're a
know,
Michigan girl.
yes, but I used to go up on Kedzie to a whole bunch of markets up there.
I suggested Kedzie and Lawrence Avenue.
Okay, that's wonderful. I don't know what's still happening there. It's been a while.
Oh yeah, that's okay. Um, I'm just going forward because there's been more discussion in the chat, mostly about how you mentioned
Oh,
collecting recipes from cookbooks and family members. What was the process of translating family regional recipes into a structured cookbook recipe?
oh gosh, yes. It was interesting because I had to like some of these recipes they were just had so little information on them, and um I would take the recipe and dive into cookbooks that have maybe some of those recipes in them that were similar or along the same lines, compare, and I was just repetitively making the recipe and changing it until it reached a state where I thought that it was excellent. And for some things, if I hadn't had the the recipe before or made it before or tasted it before, I would go on a deeper dive into trying to find that in Dearborn or with a person so that I could understand it better. But it definitely took um, a kind of relentless approach to that, and thankfully I loved doing all of that, so it didn't tire me out. I really enjoyed that path of transitioning from the idea, the recipe, the nostalgia to a truly exceptional recipe that readers of the book and bakers from this book can trust.
That's a lot. Now, how
Yeah.
I have a question for you, and it's not a commentary, but your pronunciation of some things like zatar. I know it as zatar. And Lebna, the the yogurt. I pronounce it that way. So are these sort of, I don't know if my pronunciation is right. I just know it from hearing other people saying it. And so I'm
Yeah.
wondering if it's sort of like family way of talking about it.
Certainly, there are dialects, and I took Arabic in college. And when I came home and I was speaking the Arabic I was learning, my Sito, she shooed me out of the room like, what are you saying? This is not our language, because we were learning the Nahawiya, which is the classical Arabic, and it wasn't the dialect that she knew. Um, but that said, I think that there are some aspects of Arabic that hold, and like with zata spice, uh, that isn't zatar, and I know that that is very widely used, the zatar
Hmm.
um, pronunciation. But that one is zata, the emphasis being on the first syllable. But
That's okay.
Labni or Labna, did you say Labna?
I think I said Lebna.
Yeah, I think that is, I hear people saying Labna as well. Um, so that one I think is probably a little more flexible.
That's okay. And that pastry that you showed toward the very end that was sort of shaped like a boat with the sauce inside?
The fataya,
Pitaya.
yes, fataya. A lot of these end of word sounds, they fall away. There are sounds that don't like the er at the end of fataya. It's fataya, and it's almost like you're not saying the last syllable. There is a glossary in the book that has pronunciations and a pronunciation guide too.
Oh, that's excellent. Because sometimes you say these things like Cougaman or Queenaman. It's like, well, I said I said Cougaman, and then when I left the bakery, they said it's Queenaman. It looked like Cougaman.
Yeah, totally, totally. And I'm not a native Arabic speaker. I don't speak Arabic. I have words, and it's certainly I hear native Arabic speakers saying things differently than the way I learned them, you know. So
It's okay.
we do our best. The the
I have this.
transliteration is difficult too, the way the
Yes,
words are written. That's very difficult. There hadn't been a lot of standards for that. So the way you're going to spell something that is an Arabic word can be really interesting.
absolutely, absolutely. And I'm German, and there's things that I pronounce that no other German seems to pronounce it that way. But I still hold on to it because that's how I think my grandmother said it. But she's been gone 50 years. What am I going to do at this
Oh,
point? You know, the
right.
correction, the gold standard is gone. Well, this was great. We've had a lot of discussion in the chat really about where to find Lebanese restaurants and places. Let me see, somebody just popped up something.
Oh, good.
Ah, good. Well, let me get this thing out of the way. What are some popular oh my goodness. What are some popular proteins that one can build a Lebanese meal around? Is the typical dinner plate consistent of protein, carb, and veggie?
Hmm.
I have no. Ask that for
Well,
German, I wouldn't know.
well, I would say Lebanese cuisine is one of the most perfect expressions of the Mediterranean diet. And Lebanon is perched on the Mediterranean Sea, and the cuisine is loaded with healthy, lean proteins, and every meal contains those. We have a vast vegetarian repertoire, but that includes the plant protein, the chickpeas, the bulgur, which is a grain that's very high in fiber and protein. And these are made into pilafs of all kinds with lentils um, and the lean lamb and beef, and there's a good bit of seafood as well. These are going to be found, in every meal. And the balance is incredible. But then you've got produce forward. So the salads are and vegetable dishes are essentials and so much a part of how we eat. The variety is like, endless. The variety is incredible too. So you can build a menu quite simply, but with tons of flavor coming from healthy fats, olive oil, yogurt, those kinds of things, and flavor from spices and fresh herbs. Don't need as much salt, don't need as much fat when you're using all of that.
I had a question. I just thought of something. Years ago, I had a dear friend who was Lebanese, and he would talk about how his family, they were from Beirut, how his family would and have relatives and friends over every weekend, and it sounded like there was an eternal feast going on with a zillion cousins and friends. It sounded wonderful. But is that typical of, and if so, that would mean there's plenty of room for all the desserts that in your book to be served along with thousands of entrees and
Oh yeah.
appetizers. Is that
It's
typical?
typical.
Really,
It's
how
very
wonderful.
typical. Yes, and the feasting and the family and the friends who are like family. That the warmth of Lebanese hospitality is truly renowned, and it's very much a part of how the Lebanese relate to people. And it's so many people over many many years in my broader community from my work will tell me that they they had a neighbor who was Lebanese, or they had some touch point with the Lebanese, and they were part of a feast. They were welcomed in, and they loved it, and they always remember what that was about. So yeah, the feasting is really I mean, Thanksgiving's going to be this will all be gone behind me, and this whole room will be filled with tables of food.
But your book, again, there's an expression, don't try this at home. It looks like your book screams, try this at home.
Thank you. That's very nice to hear.
Well, thank you
Uh,
so much. And
we
again,
had a couple more
oh, I'm
questions if you
sorry,
don't
go
mind.
ahead,
No,
Kat.
no, no, no. We might as well, since we're almost finished, might as well get the last two, right?
These are our,
Other than
Sure.
out, no, no, I'm so sorry. You're signing off really nicely. We'll get back to that.
oh no,
Is
I've
there much
signed
of a
off. You just finish the questions and we'll depart. But these are dessert questions because they're the last course here.
Okay. Other than olive oil, what other oils are popular in Lebanese cooking?
Well, olive oil is primary, but then in my baking book especially, I do call for neutral oils quite a bit. They're lighter in color and flavor, and those neutral oils I think are as diverse as a family to family. You know, like I like to use canola oil. I look for expeller pressed canola, organic expeller pressed canola that it does not have the scary factor in it, but also avocado oil has become quite popular as well. I know many Lebanese cooks who are using that. But with the baking, you know, I would try to stick with the oils that are recommended for various recipes because it will ensure that the recipe will come out right. But the other would be like a safflower oil and a little bit of coconut oil too. You'll find that.
Okay, last question. Is there much of a cheese presence in Lebanese pastry? And if so, what types do we run into?
There is a lot of cheese, whether it's yogurt cheese, the Labneh cheese, or the Akawi cheese, which is super salty but very melty and stretchy cheese. The Akawi is a white cheese that has to be soaked before you can use it because it's that salty. It's like you can't really eat it unless you soak it. So that soaking will remove a lot of the salt, and that's what's been traditionally used in these sort of sweet and salty, savory pastries. So the Akawi cheese, um, you still would see some feta cheese in Lebanese cooking, and the mozzarella cheese, which isn't classic Lebanese, but when like I'll call for it instead of the Akawi cheese, it makes a good replacement. But using like block mozzarella. There's
Sounds
also
delicious.
Spanish cheese. I'll mention that
Mm,
too. It's called Spanish cheese, but you see it in Middle Eastern grocery stores all the time.
something to look for as we dive
Yes.
into all these stores looking for ingredients. Thank you so much. And Scott, you can say thank you, the last word.
Thank you. So in Arabic, would this be appropriate? Salam alaikum. Is that what is
Yes, that's a greeting, a blessing, peace be with you, and shukran, thank
Yes,
you, and
shukran.
thank you to you, Scott, and to you, Kathy, and all of the Chicago gang here. I am so happy to be able to connect with all of you and talk about Lebanese baking.
Thank you for a very sweet presentation. We love it.
Thanks for having me.
And we got to keep
Oh,
meeting
I
like
will
this.
mention, yeah, that my book, you can get my books wherever you like to buy books, and that's all wonderful. And you can get signed books on my website, shop maureenabood.com, and then like tons of recipes at maureenabood.com. And please reach out. I'd love to be in touch.
You better believe it. Oh, one last question here, and maybe you don't want to answer this. You've already written two groundbreaking books. You've covered the main foods of Lebanon and Rosewater. Your book, what's the name of the book again? Rosewater.
Rosewater and orange blossoms.
Yes, that what a beautiful book. And now you've done desserts. You've had the entrees and the desserts is there any what are you going to be working on anything else or do you want to even say anything about that?
You know, I don't think I'll stop here for sure. I'm thinking about the next thing already. Hopefully I can spend the holidays not thinking about the next thing, but yes, more to come for sure.
Okay, well let's book you for your next speaking trip right now for the culinary historians.
Perfect.
And I hope to see you sometime in the near future at the next awards ceremony so I can watch you speak with
Thank you,
everything.
Scott. Thank you, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving.
Good
All
night.
right.